Okay, so what we'll do is we're just going to go through this PowerPoint a little bit, not all the way through, and Sir will interject at any points when he wants to do any kind of practical demonstration of what we're doing. So guitar amps are a type of amplifier, and amplifiers can be used for all kinds of different uses. I mean, in your stereo speakers, in your car, in your headphones, as a guitar amp, power amps. There's things called preamps just for microphones. There's all kinds of uses, but essentially what they do is they take a quiet signal, such as a guitar output or a bit of tape output or something that's got a very quiet signal, electrical signal, and amplify it so you can hear it through a speaker, so it can move some air so you can hear it. Okay, so here's a couple of guys standing in front of a really big speaker. Okay, so let's just go on to the next one. This is how they work. So if you see in the top left here, we've got a little diagram, and there's a magnet, right? So this is a little bit of physics that you're going to have to know about. A magnet is part of the electromagnetic dichotomy, if you like. So if you have a magnetic wave, you're going to have an electric wave as well. So what happens with a microphone, which is when you speak into a microphone, the magnet moves inside an electric coil, and that induces a electric current, which is the same as that movement in the magnet. So that is a very small current. It's a very small electrical current, and in order for it to be reproduced again through a speaker, it needs to be amplified. So what happens is the microphone comes in here, as you can see. Part of it goes into one part of the amplifier. This bit goes into this bottom bit of the amplifier, and we have a power circuit here which goes in as well, and that power is then added to that electrical signal, which then goes back to the speaker, goes to a speaker here, which moves a coil, which moves the cone. Okay, so really what you could think of is that a speaker is the opposite of a microphone. Whereas a microphone converts sound waves into electrical waves, a speaker converts electrical waves into sound waves. Now that's a very important point. Okay, so is anyone clear on that so far? If you've got any questions?
Someone summarize what Thor just said. I'll pick someone in 3 seconds if you don't put your hand up. 3, 2, 1. Arky.
Speakers electric produce sound and sound electric.
The last thing, yeah. So speakers turn electrical signal into sound waves, and amplifiers turn. Finish my sentence, somebody. Or Thor's sentence, should I say? Milo? Because it's the opposite, right?
Sound waves into electric.
Yeah, exactly. Nice.
Yeah, an amplifier will increase the input electrical signal from a microphone, will increase its power, so it will be able to move a speaker. So that's why you need power. You need extra electricity in an amplifier in order to amplify the signal. You need that power there, because otherwise the signal is too small. So that's why you have in a club, if you've ever been to a club, you've got speakers which run on kilowatts. So you'd say if you're in a big club, you might have a 10k rig. That means you use 10,000 watts of power in order to amplify that small signal coming from a record deck, for example. With a record deck, you can consider to be the same as a speaker. It's basically turning vibration from the record into electrical current, which is then amplified. Okay, so we'll go through this again. So this is just your first little introduction to the physics of amplification. So a little bit more detail here. You can see that this is your stereo, and we've got your speakers. This is your stereo. Now, in like we're talking about the 10k rig, you actually have what's called a crossover here. So you separate out the signal at this point. So you might have a low woofer, which is just doing the bass frequencies. Okay, so that has a filter on it, which only lets the low frequencies through to power the woofer, so all the bass frequencies. And then we've got a high pass frequency, high pass filter here, which only passes the high frequencies, so all the top end stuff. And everything that's left is the mid range. So that's what most of the sound is, to be fair. But this is called a crossover. So that's quite an important little element to be aware of when I'm talking about speakers, is that you'll have in a typical speaker, you'll have a bass woofer and a tweeter. And in expensive speakers, you'll have a mid-range as well. Okay. So let's just move on to the next one. So this is a slightly different type of amplifier. This is called a preamp. So what this does is this is normally designed to work with a particular microphone or with low output microphones. And what it does is it essentially converts that really low signal in a very clean way, right, to a slightly higher signal, which then can be amplified. So, for example, on a record player, the output of a record player is so quiet that before it goes into the amplifier, it needs to have a preamp on it as well. So that's why if you plug a record player into a line input of a amp, it won't work because the signal is too low. So it's like an extra stage of amplification, okay? And if you go into the high end of music production, preamps are kind of, you can think of them as different tones, different colors of sound. So a particular combination of microphone, say like something really posh, like a Telefunken U47, which are worth about 25 grand, right, would have its own preamp that would work just with that. And you wouldn't use any other preamps with that microphone. Okay, so it's just like another level of amplification that's really important. Okay, everyone with me? You can just nod or put your thumbs up. That's cool. Everyone good? Good, great. Okay, so let's carry on then. So here are some power amps. So these are the sort of amps that you would use to power your 10K rig, for example. Okay, so if we look at the bottom half here, this is they get hot. They're high ampage, they're high wattage. They create a lot of heat. So that's why you have this vent at the back, which lets out all the heat. They'll have fans in them as well to keep them cool. And if you've ever been to a rave that's really, really hot, sometimes they get so hot that the amps can't cool down and everything will just stop working until someone comes along with a fan and starts blowing air trying to blow cold air into the amps again. Things to look at are these type of speaker outputs. Now they use a particular type of lead called speak-ons, which can carry a high amount of current. So that's why they're particularly thick and they're used for large gigs and things like that. So
is
there's
this helpful? No, it's a preamp, but is this helpful?
That's a preamp. That's a really nice preamp. And if you when you get to do your recordings and you do recording vocals and things that are quite important in the mix, use that preamp because it's exceptionally good. Okay, so here is a hi-fi amp. This is a kind of amplifier that we would have had back in the day. Nowadays, people don't really have these anymore, but this would be the staple of every teenager in the world in the 1990s and before that. But now it's all Bluetooth speakers. But this is basically a domestic hi-fi, and you have a selection of inputs. So you might have tape input, CD input, phono input, and a couple of basic controls like bass and treble here. Loudness, which is essentially a type of compression, balance between the speakers left and right. These are kind of, I mean, they still exist, but people don't tend to use them these days because everyone just listens to music on their phone. And if they want to listen to it out in a room, they just fly it to a Bluetooth speaker. So it's all very different now. But this kind of technology will be talked about in the course. So yeah, these are what are known as active speakers. Now, if you ever get into live sound, you will come across these. So basically what they do is they have the amplifier built into the speaker. So instead of having the amp away off somewhere else and then connected to the speaker by cable, this would have this would have the all the amplification in the speaker. Now the benefit of that is that it's completely matched. The amplifier is totally matched to the speaker. The disadvantage is they need power. So not only do you need to get a audio cable to the back of the speaker, you've also got to put a power cable to the back of the speaker, which can be quite annoying, especially in big venues, because you've got to find somewhere where there's a power outlet. So they're good for small gigs. They're not so good for large gigs. Okay, so let's just get on to instrument amps. Okay, so Matt is a bass player, and he knows all about active and passive basses, I'm sure. The difference being that from a practical perspective, the difference is an active bass, you need to put a 9-volt battery in it, so it will make a sound. And obviously, it will always run out in the middle of a gig. Has that happened to you, Matt?
Oh, yeah, many times. Why did this rubbish? Oh, that's why.
So, but active basses have got a better frequency response, so they sound sharper, brighter, more lively, bouncier. You know, they're less. Because with a bass guitar, the reason why you have active basses is because the frequencies that you're dealing with are large, they're long frequencies. So for example, you might be talking about 100 hertz or 100 cycles per second, and it takes time for that to happen because they're so slow. So with an active bass, it just speeds up that process. So they're more responsive. An active bass is more responsive. And here we've got.
I've got my bass, so I'll show them the difference.
Okay. Yeah.
You can't see me, but I'm doing it now.
Okay.
I know this is a guitar amp, so it doesn't sound quite as good as it should be. But you can just hear. You can actually turn off the active preamp here.
Okay.
Sorry, that's what
Yeah, the sounds coming out of the Teams is not very good. I think maybe you've got sound suppression on it, so it's not working very well.
Yeah. I'll change it anyway because that's a guitar amp and it sounds dreadful.
Okay, so yeah, I can't quite hear that properly because I think you've got noise suppression on on Teams, but we'll not worry about it this time.
No, it's fine.
Okay, so basically, if going from left to right, you can see you've got two inputs, passive and active. Now, passive will have slightly quieter output, so that'll be why you need that, because that'll have a slightly larger preamp in it here. The active won't be as have such a large preamp. And then you have gain. So this is another. This is again the preamp level, and this is the amount of level that you're putting into the amp. Okay, as opposed to volume. Now this is a very good. You must know the distinction between these two things. Gain is the input. The input volume, right? The input level. Gain is input level into a system. And volume is output level of a system. Okay, so that's very important, and they do make the difference. And in the middle here, you have the equalization. Now, EQ is essentially the same. It's like gain. It's a gain stage, but for different frequencies. So if you wanted to add some bass level, you would add bass. Here they've added plus 15 because they're mad. Middle, they haven't added any middle at all to the sound, and they've added a little bit of treble, the treble being the top end. So a bit like this crossover I was talking about. Here's a good example of how a crossover would be implemented on a guitar amp. Okay? Right, so let's carry on. So here is a guitar amp controls. Again, we have gain and volume, right next to each other, because that's weird, but never mind. So that's your input level relating to here, and that's your output level, which is actually at the end of this here, but for some reason they put it there. This one is a digital amp, so it has a voice knob here. These voices would give you different tones. So essentially, instead of like changing amps, you could have different amp models all on each one of these things, and then it's the same. You've got bass and treble, no mid for some reason. And then you have effects level. So You have an effect select here. So it could be chorus, reverb. We'll look at effects in more detail at another date. But essentially, you can add, say, a reverb, which is like a sense of space, or a delay to the sound. Most amps have this kind of setup. Okay, so there's a pretty standard amp setup. All right. Okay, next. So just to reiterate, guitars have high frequencies. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Sorry. So do you want to interject there, Matt?
Yeah, I do. Just give me just summarize that, and then I'm just almost finished setting up a bass and guitar amp separately, so we can actually properly hear a difference.
Okay, so the guitar, it would have higher frequencies, so you'll have smaller speaker cones, normally 10-inch speakers. There'd be more controls over the sound, so you have like more amp types, model types, effects like reverb, delay, chorus that you don't need on basses. And then a bass amp would have larger speaker, typically. Again, you might have 10-inch speaker, but normally you'd have a 12-inch speaker, hopefully. And it would be tuned. The speaker would be tuned to replicate deeper frequencies. And a keyboard general amp would have more loads of inputs. Like, so maybe you could plug a microphone into it. You could plug in a a stereo or something. So it might have phono inputs as well as jacks and XLR. Okay. I'm just going to carry on with like a little bit of history to do with amps. So these are the first little guitar amps that came out. They were called woodies because they were in a wooden box, and they were basically there to make the guitar loud enough so it could be heard next to a saxophone, trumpet, double bass, because acoustic guitars get lost. They can't get heard, since the accordion time. So accordions came along and they basically put musicians out of business because they were so loud and you could play everything. And then the electricity was invented, and that meant the end of the accordion. So, happy days. There's no accordion players in the audience, are there, in the class? Good. So this is the first bass amp, one of the first Fender bass amps. Here's a little pop fact for you. The first bass players were not called bass players, they were called Fender bass players, because Fender were the only people that made basses. And the first basses, I believe, was a P bass. And if you look at the price on this, a 1959 Busman custom built cab, £3,800. A snip. So yeah, go out, save your pocket money, guys. You too could own one of these if you're really lucky. Right. Okay. So here we got in the 1960s. You had Fender brought out the Fender Twin, which is a classic amplifier. It also had a built-in tremolo effect, which was used on keyboards as well. Basically, it's called a Twin because there were two speakers in it, so it was twice as loud. Really good amp, excellent. Fender make great amps. And then Marshall came on the scene halfway through the 60s. They had a much more rocky tone, more distorted tone, and they could add in overdrive to the sound as well. So much better for solos and kind of sustained notes, those sort of things. If you want to listen to one of the classic first users of the Marshall, then you have to look at Jimi Hendrix. Hopefully you've heard of Jimi Hendrix. Hands up who's heard of Jimi Hendrix. Okay, he was really important to guitarists. So he did things to the guitar that no one else had ever done or even thought about, and he basically changed the way in which guitar was played after. So definitely worth checking out. He even wrote a few good songs. If there was a good album to check out, it'd probably be, my favorite would be Axel Boulder's Love, and maybe Band of Gypsies, but Axis Boulder's Love would be the one to go for. And now we have plugins. So as part of your coursework, you're going to have to record a guitar, but now you don't have to actually use an amp, even though I would suggest that you do, just for the experience, because they do sound better. But you can emulate a lot of the things that you can do on an amplifier with a software plugin, even down to what type of mic you use and where you place it. So there's a lot of information in here, and I'm going to do a whole presentation on just that at another time. Okay. So finishing off, just to finish off, here's an amp for a Marshall. These are all the things you can get on a Marshall. So you can see it's quite complicated. There's a lot of variation, and there's a lot of different sounds that you can get out of a guitar and a guitar amp. You really need to think of a electric guitar and amp as an instrument in itself. Like them both together create the instrument, if you like. And yeah, so that's basically it. After that, we talk about distortion, but that'd be another lesson.